All right, hello everyone. You're listening to Castbitten, a Dungeon Synth podcast, and I'm the host Trev. I'm so excited today to be joined by the wonderful Rog, a super prolific Croatian musician who mainly releases Dungeon Synth and ambient albums with, as they describe them, medieval and mystic elements. Rog has, to my knowledge, 12 releases, and they're all great. They're all super good. Through the magic of post-production, you actually just heard a brand new track from Rog. It's titled Nira. It's something that they generously shared with me to start out the episode. Yeah, this song is so cool. These deep, chimey bells just transport me off into another world. So yeah, welcome Rog. Thanks for coming on.
Hello, hello.
So yeah, I kind of want to dive in and talk about this new track. Am I pronouncing it right? It's Nira?
Nira, yeah.
Nira, okay. Well, yeah, it's incredible. So kind of the first thing I'm thinking from reading the write-ups on your most recent albums, Sanctuary and Delvers, which are also super cool.
Thanks.
It seems like with those, you set out with how you said no firm plans of how things are going to sound. You're really just trying to explore and experiment and see what happens. Does this new track have that same approach?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's my general approach, actually. I don't really have like set plans on what kind of track I want to make or often even what instruments I'm going to use. It's a lot of exploration and just, testing, and looking into what the various sound libraries have, and then just, coming up with something as I go.
Right. That's super cool. Is that the case with your older albums as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh really? Yeah, I've noticed things like Bush and Thicket, for example. I know that kind of has a distinctly folk sound all over it. Is that something?
Yeah,
that you think in your head?
That
How does that work?
album in particular actually started out when I discovered the Aegean sound bank. It's like a very simple SF2 sound bank, and I just started playing around with it, and because of the sounds that it makes, I just ended up making a bunch of medieval tracks, which I ended up making into that album. It was also just a lot of experimentation, really. I didn't really set out to make that specific album, but I did want to make something medieval, and well, that's just what came up.
It's just what came up. Yeah, that gets me really excited to hear, because I feel like that happens a lot of times. Yeah. Whatever virtual instrument I've recently downloaded kind of dictates the sound of the track.
Yeah. Well, maybe for someone who's like a professional musician and they're actually hardcore into composition and stuff, I'm sure that they know what they're doing, but it's experimentation for me because I'm not a musician. That's not my profession.
Oh, well, that's interesting that you say that. You have a very professional feel throughout your releases. It's very coherent, the way that the sounds kind of roll together. Do you have any sort of formal background with music?
No, not at all. It's funny that people keep telling me this, because I actually didn't even look up tutorials for FL Studio or for mastering. Or I've never actually seen a legit tutorial. I just looked up the tools that it has so I can get started. And just through playing around, I learned a lot. And from getting some suggestions off the internet, people were saying what they were using, and I ended up making a whole procedure of how I master my music. And that's essentially why, I mean, it's not to brag, but really people just keep telling me that my mastering and mixing is really good.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. It's very professional sounding, and mastering is something that there's, in my opinion, there's so many nuances to it. It's tough to get it sounding professional. Do you feel like maybe you were making lower quality decisions at first, and kind of through those errors you found your way, or were you pretty on it right off the bat?
No, it wasn't right off the bat. Of course not.
Right. Well, that's reassuring.
It's a skill that's learned for sure, but it's important to understand what you're actually doing with the effects and everything that you have. So, to make things short, you want to use equalizers for literally everything. Every instrument that you have, use an equalizer on it, because
Absolutely.
yeah, then you can bring out, the various frequencies. You can pick them out, and you can make them stand out or stand down, so you can literally make new instruments out of your existing instruments just by changing the equalizer settings. After that, you gotta do stereo correction if you want to fill out the soundscape, right?
Hmm.
I think it's really really important for my music, because I like the crisp and filled uh, audio sound sphere. I just love it when it's all filled up. Um, it's often in black metal music and dungeon synth that little to no mastering is done, and then the sound is bland throughout the entire release and things like that. I personally dislike that, so I put a lot of time into learning how to master and make it sound crisp and full.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I noticed that oftentimes with tracks, it does stand out, and it's that extra effort. It really adds a lot to it. And I don't know, it's really interesting because that's both a technical thing to improve at, but you also got to work on your ears.
Oh, of course, of course.
Yeah, yeah, you need to be able to hear it.
Yeah, and it's really important that you actually have good headphones, because up until Delvers, I think I had like just some normal gaming headphones, and things were going quite well and they were serviceable. But the moment I got myself entry level studio headphones, that was a whole new world. You just have to get good
Really,
studio headphones.
that's really
Yeah,
compelling.
it's incomparable how much better they are.
So, are there any other parts to your mastering process? You mentioned EQ and
Yeah,
stereo.
so I always start with EQ and stereo corrections. Then often I'll use something like the head crusher effect, which is kind of weird because it has only a few knobs, but it makes the sound gravitate either towards the high frequencies or low frequencies. It's a really, really simple effect, and it's free on the VST for free
I love to
website.
hear
You can
that.
look it up. It's
Yeah,
pretty good.
I'm not familiar with that. Is it a compressor?
Something like that. It's kind of like magic, really. Yeah,
Sometimes compressors feel like magic, the way they just make it better.
yeah, yeah.
Yup, they balance out the EQ,
Um,
saturation.
yeah. After that, so I'll use sometimes the Ferox effect, which is also some kind of compression, but not very often. What's more important is that I use a lot of reverb and the delays. Often I'll make like simple patterns, which then evolve themselves into atmospheric backgrounds just because of the reverb and delays. I
Right.
do that very, very often, and I really, really like that. I love that.
Yeah, even on that track that I mentioned we started with, I feel like you can hear a lot of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it rolls into the background.
exactly.
It's very soupy. Even if it gets to the point where you're not hearing the delays, it's so nice.
Yeah, it blends in just really nice.
Yeah, it's great. So we kind of dove right into the end of the song with the mastering.
Hmm.
Yeah, how about for writing it? Do you feel like you start with maybe like a background? Like, I know I'm guilty of starting with a bass first and then adding in more. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have a go-to? Is it kind of just all over the place?
Yeah, so you asked me if I have any background in music. I
Yeah.
have absolutely none. I I have not had any music education at all, and I can't play a single instrument. But I did get a bass guitar,
Oh,
which
nice.
I'm practicing with, but I'm really not very good. and I do have a MIDI keyboard that I only recently started learning how to play. I started getting a little into music theory because I was interested. I didn't even know anything about music theory either up until now. And Sanctuary is already released, so go figure. You can really do a lot of things without knowing anything.
Yeah, and theory is really interesting. You can get by without it, but once you have it, it's just another tool, a toolbox.
Yeah, definitely. It helps me a lot with improvising.
Oh yeah.
And I can already play some things, just discover new melodies that I can work
For
with,
sure.
and so forth and so forth. But you asked me if I have some go-to process of like composing a new song or something. So in general, I already know what kind of atmosphere I'd like to have. I usually know what I'd like the song to feel like, and that's what I begin with. I start to look for instruments or musical textures like synths or something for ambient and stuff, and I just try to make a sound that I like, which fits in what I wanted to make, right? And then I work off of that. Um, I, I mean, I used to use a lot of percussion, but lately I really, really haven't used
Interesting.
any at all.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes with synths especially, you can get something that has that impact of percussion, fills things out.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's super interesting. One thing I'm kind of hung up on, I think you mentioned you've just recently gotten a MIDI keyboard. Before, were you programming the MIDI by hand?
I still do that, yeah. Just
Oh
by
man,
hand.
I love that. I do that all the time. Yeah.
It just works. It just works.
Yeah, it just works.
Yeah.
One of the wonderful things. Just pick up the note, put it where you want it.
Yeah. It's very easy to get into, especially with FL Studio. I absolutely love how FL Studio works. It's so easy to get into.
Really?
And it works really well. I love it.
Yeah, I've never tried out FL Studio. I had a little experience with Reaper and I just stuck with that. Unlike you, I've watched like a million videos, tutorials. It's not as natural for me.
You probably know more than me then.
Oh, I don't know about that. Speaks to FL Studio though, that you haven't had to look anything up.
Yeah, so you can really do everything with FL Studio. It is very, very simple to use,
Right.
but it's very powerful, really. I started with FL Studio because when I first got into music, quote unquote, I was in like late high school, I think. And by reading some, guides, what should I start with?
Mhm.
And it was just like, FL Studio is great for beginners. Sure, man, let's look into it. And
Yeah.
it just stuck with me because it's so nice to work with. It's great. I
Right.
love it. I tried working with Ableton, but it's really not as intuitive as FL Studio, even though it's extremely powerful and the performance, especially for playing live, is amazing. But it also costs a lot, and I can't really
Yep.
go with that
I get
right
that.
now. So I'm sticking with FL Studio just because I love the way it works and it does everything for me that I need.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I know you've used FL Studio this whole time.
Mhm.
Have there been any sound banks or virtual instruments, things like that, that really stand out to you that you've maybe come back to time to time? It's made an appearance on a lot of albums, or something you go to if you're stuck?
Yeah, there are some Contact 5
Oh yeah,
instrument banks or whatever. I don't know what they're called because I just have them installed and use them.
right.
There's it's called iAgain Symphony SF2 pack. It's really, really good. I've used it many times, and Bush and Thicket, the entire album is made, 95% in just that.
Oh really?
Um,
Do you mind repeating the name of that? The symphony one?
yeah, iAgain Symphony. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. Hold on.
Okay. Yeah, wow. That's really interesting. I definitely I can relate to that, to sometimes just having one package
Yeah,
and it feels like it shows up on everything.
yeah, and this Symphonic SF2 is free, so you can just download it.
Ah,
There's
music to my ears.
also the what is it called? Also a free VST for Sonatina Symphonic Orchestra. That's what
Okay.
it's called, I think.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, I love that one. I've used it so many times.
Okay, yeah, that's got the rock stamp of approval then.
Yeah, officially approved by
Officially.
yours truly. Um, I've also used some very random synths from VST for free. Like I have no clue what they're called, but I just went to the synths tab and just downloaded a
Yeah,
bunch of them
just
and
download them.
yeah, I started exploring. And
Yup.
they have Avalon is to a great degree made up by these random ass free
Oh,
synths that I found
really?
online. Yeah, yeah.
Oh man, that's so cool. I love getting the background on that.
Yeah, and it's really funny because those synths and free instruments often sound like ass when you first try them, but then you do effects magic with
Yeah, yeah.
reverb and stereo correction, and that's what really makes it sound, usable, serviceable, or even good if you know what you're doing.
Right, even good maybe.
Yeah, Which you're
Yeah, I totally know what you
yeah.
mean. Sometimes there's just there's so many frequencies that are junk frequencies, and you got to cut them out. And what you left with sometimes is really good, though.
Yeah. So I just
Yeah.
remembered something. Is it called? Yeah, VSK Music, VST plugins. I use some of those. Those are pretty good.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah, and there's this really big synth and preset bank called Omnisphere.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, that's pretty big. Yeah, it's just magical. There's so much good things in that, from percussion to ethnic instruments and synths. Just so many good things.
Yeah.
I really recommend it. Yeah,
Really.
but it's not so much for dungeon synth, but more for like ambient music and techno music.
I see.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned kind of getting into music, as you said, late in high school. You've mentioned black metal
Yeah.
as well as dungeon synth. Yeah. What was kind of your foray into
So
creating music? Was that dungeon synth? Or was that something that came in later on, maybe?
I discovered the dungeon synth sometime before I released my first album, Brave Sir Robin and Air. Let me just check. I think that was 2018. Yeah, that was April 2018.
Okay.
So
Right.
around that time, I discovered Dungeon Synth, and most of Brave Sir Robin was already made. And a friend of mine just nagged me to put it on Facebook because there's these groups, right,
Right.
which
Right.
post all those kinds of music. And at some point, I just made a bandcamp page and posted it, and that's where my Dungeons in career started, right?
I love that. Wow.
Yeah, but the way I started with the music was just because I'm very much into game development, actually.
Oh.
And that was the original reason why I got into music, because I'm rather autistic about doing everything myself. And I just absolutely love all the creative processes that I can get into:
Interesting.
visual art, 3D modeling, programming, music making, writing. I love doing all of those things. So that's the reason why I actually got into music.
Wow.
Um,
That's a whole side that I wasn't aware of. Do you have any games developed or 3D modeling that's out there?
yeah, yes and no. I used to have a Game Jolt page. It was like a site where you could share your little indie games and stuff like that. And there was this little game jam in which I participated, and I made a high school project game and another thing after that. But it was just really little simple things, nothing you'd really enjoy seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Music is really the thing that I did the most as far as arts are concerned. I'm actually working as a programmer
Oh,
currently,
interesting.
and yeah, I'm trying to get a degree in mathematics and computer science. So I'm kind of a technology, mathematics, and programming person.
Yeah, yeah, you got it all. Wow, that's
Yeah.
intense. Do you feel like if you have a big background in video games, does that
Oh
influence?
yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's big
Absolutely.
influence.
Absolutely. So,
Is there a go-to game like that? Like all kind of ties back to?
well, not really, because video game music is not really what inspired me the most.
I see.
My greatest inspiration for music was the anime Made in Abyss. The soundtrack is composed by Kevin Penkin. I think he's an Australian composer. I
Mm,
might be wrong on that. But
okay.
essentially, that entire soundtrack was just, it sounded to me like something that I wanted to make myself. And there's a few more projects out there, like Vishuddha Kali with its album called Xenoduck. And that's something that really, really inspired me to just start making my own things, because I figured that it can be so hard that I can't learn to do these things. And it's so artistically beautiful to me. And I enjoy these things so much that I just got into it. And it's convenient because game development also needs music, right? You can't really have a deaf game,
Right, right.
so it goes hand in hand. But essentially, when I was in late high school, I started with that, but I was really, really slow with it. I just boot up FL Studio sometimes and play around, not really making anything, until 2018, when I actually started making like medieval tracks, and that ended up being Brave Sir Robin. And along with that, Air, my first like Middle Eastern toned album.
Right, and that one's pretty special.
Those are, yeah, just my first actually finished tracks, you could say.
Well, and so in 2018, when you're kind of making those and kind of getting introduced to Dungeon Synth,
Yeah.
what are some of the Dungeon Synth artists that stood out to you, or maybe even now, which ones do you really enjoy?
Okay, so for Dungeon Synth, you have Bellkeeper, Hedge Wizard,
Oh yeah,
Dwarrel Delph, Umbria, Witchtomb, Lord Leviticus, Ernil, Iago, and Malfet. Those are some of the things that I've written down. You got Tyr, Thief, of course.
of course, yeah.
You got Pattern Shift, that's a bit obscure. Um, but there's more of other things that I listen to. When it comes to Dungeon Synth, I'm really, really picky, because there's so many releases which are just not mastered, and they're rather simplistic, and I just don't enjoy them.
Yeah,
But if you,
I totally know where you're coming from.
yeah, but if you take something like Witch Tomb with its album called Lord of Blizzards,
Mm-hmm.
that's absolutely amazing. The mix, the atmosphere, the composition is actually pretty simple, but the sound is amazing.
Yeah, yeah, that makes
So
all the
it's a
difference.
it's yeah, it's a diverse world, really.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, I love that just in 30 seconds we just got the ROG master list. All the
Well, as far as Dungeon Synth is concerned, at least, yeah.
right, right. So okay, that's awesome. So we got some of the music that has inspired you and we kind of dipped into gaming. I know with like with Avalon, it's ties to
Hmm.
those mythological Arthurian legends, or I think those Drowned you mentioned is inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's story.
Oh yeah,
Seems like yeah, a lot of this is maybe literature, maybe mythology. It seems really relevant to some of your albums.
yeah.
I guess what I'm wondering is when you make something with a direct tie to a world like that, something established versus something that is kind of from your own headcanon, do you feel like the process is different? Maybe the music creation?
Well, it's not really, because when I started writing down like short stories for the Delver's universe, actually,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the albums Revelation of Melesh, Delver's Sanctuary, and what I'm working on right now, these are all focused around this imaginary world that I'm working on. And essentially, I realized with time that the stories and characters and like godly beings that I'm thinking up, they actually correlate to actual mythological things. You can pull parallels between them, and it's really not a wonder because I always was into mythology, religion,
Hmm.
and psychology, philosophy, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I do have a background of looking into mythologies and insight about that in general.
Yeah, and you mentioned with Delvers having all these stories. It's something I have written in my notes that I love. I love that you have a lot of write-ups for all your albums. That adds a lot of context to the listening experience.
Mm,
I feel like especially with instrumental music, when you have something, to prep
yeah.
yourself. Yeah. Yeah, it really just sets the tone.
Yeah. I'm a little poetic sometimes, so things like that happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you feel like with this Delverse universe, like from a storytelling perspective, do you think that's going to keep going, or do you think that Sanctuary kind of wraps it up?
No, it's
Oh.
not done because a lot of that is based on my dreams actually. So this is something that keeps developing over time.
Oh,
It's
wow.
a yeah a personal thing to some extent, but I can put it in such a format in which I'm constantly exploring my own psyche and internal world and actually using that to create things in the external world in my hobbies.
Wow,
So
that
yeah.
is just such a rich place for that to come from, and for all of that to culminate into music and writing. It's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it happens like spontaneously to a great amount.
Right.
It's not something that I'm trying to force. It's just that's how I work, I
Right.
guess.
So, do you feel like, on that note, like you're the type of musician that works a little bit every day, or do you kind of get in a fugue state and crank out a bunch of music?
Yeah, sometimes it happens that I'll make like 5 tracks over 3 days. That's
Oh,
what
yeah.
happened with Avalon in a great extent.
Oh,
But
really?
something like Delvers and the Revelation of Melesh was something that I made over months when I had days when I felt like that I should make something, and then I did, and then just went to play League of Legends or something for the rest of the time. Yeah,
it's good. You feel like, hey, I did something today. Like I can sleep or mess around or whatever.
yeah.
You can't take away the fact I made a song.
Yeah, so it's something that I do just for fun and enjoyment. It's really just something that I like doing. I'm never forcing myself to do this.
For sure.
Yeah.
So as a listener, it all sounds great, but do you feel like you end up with a different sound or a different type of track with those two methods, like with making 5 songs in 3 days versus taking your time over some months?
Well, actually, not, because I'm just still doing the same thing, but it depends on how much invested I am into it. So if I'm more invested, I'm just going to end up making more things, but the entire process and the way I perceive it is going to be the same.
I see.
So what I end up with, yeah, is just going to be on the same standard because I'm just making what I like to make, what I like
Right.
to hear. So the result is always, what it would be either way.
So with something like Sanctuary or Delvers, do you find yourself working on one song at a time, beginning to end, or do you kind of start a couple and come back and tweak and eventually wrap it up?
So it's often that I discover a set of instruments that they form a certain atmosphere that I like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I flesh out a few patterns from them, and each of these patterns usually develops into a track. So at times I'll make like 5 bases for tracks and then flesh them out one by one from start to end.
I see.
This happened a lot with Delver's Sanctuary and Avalon, but for Pripoviedania 1, it's one of the albums.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
Yeah, thanks. with that one, I just went from song to song, making one after another. And it's actually
Okay.
funny that the first songs for my albums are usually the last ones that I make. That's the usual case.
Oh, really? That's really
Yeah.
interesting. So you just put them first because you're super excited and want to lead with them?
Yeah, so Sanctuary was actually finished for a whole week, but I was thinking to myself, I don't really have like a opening track, and that's bugging me. I don't want to release this because it doesn't feel right. And then
Yeah,
one
yeah.
day, just this entire finished album, and I get this stream of motivation, and in just like 15 minutes, I flesh out this entire track, and that's it.
And that's
That's
for
that's the
Sanctuary,
finish.
right?
Yeah, and that's the first song, the opening
Wow,
song.
that's Villa
Yeah,
Leaves. Yeah, wow. That's really funny with is that album. I think it's like 15, 16 songs or so.
yeah,
It's funny to think you have 14 tracks finished and it's still just missing
yeah,
something.
yeah.
Right.
I
Right, there's already so much there. It's not a like a link thing it needs to meet. It's just something missing and you knew it.
yeah, yeah. I'm always sitting on some finished tracks, always.
Wow. That's great. Yeah, so like I hope this is okay to ask with the new track. Is that from a new album? Is there already something cooking?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah?
yeah. So if you take Revelation of Melish and Delvers,
Mm-hmm.
that's like a green and yellow album. One is like in European tones, and the other one is in Middle Eastern tones. So that's a pair. And now I've made Sanctuary, and I've got
Oh.
to make a pair to that, and that's going to be Nira.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
great. Gosh, that's just so cool. What a world.
Yeah, so Nira is underway. I can say that confidently,
Okay.
but I can't say that I'm very actively working on it because when I get
Right.
motivation, when I really feel like working on it, then I'm working on it.
Right, right. Well, it seems like you've released like 12 albums since 2018.
Yeah, so
No rush.
no
You hit
rush.
your
Yeah,
quota. One thing that you mentioned earlier, and I kind of put this thought in my head. I wanted to bring it back out. You mentioned Ableton. I think might be easier for live performance. Is live performance something?
not easier, but it has better performance in terms of
I see.
latency.
Right, right.
Yeah, it has a lot less latency than FL Studio in my experience.
Okay, yeah.
So I do play my bass through FL Studio with effects because I don't actually have an amp or anything. I just have
Right.
a,
You just go
a
direct in.
basic audio interface.
Okay,
And
yeah.
I do play my MIDI keyboard, and that's the extent of live playing, but it's also just for discovering melodies. And
Mhm.
Nira is actually going to be the first album in which I actually play something on a MIDI keyboard.
Okay, nice. So it sounds like you've never like held a concert, like performed a live show.
Damn, no, no.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
something that I think about with Dungeon Synth. It's so difficult to do, and I've seen it done. Oftentimes it is interesting, but I don't know. I think about if I were to play my music live, there's so many logistical issues that I just struggle to see how it would work out. Do you see that as something you'd ever do? Like putting on a live rock performance, or is that too difficult?
well, I have no clue how I'd go about that. How would I play my music live? I have no clue
Right.
because
Yeah, there's so many layers. It's one person.
yeah, and it's also because I haven't actually played my music.
Right.
I've programmed it.
Yes. Yeah, I think that especially with drums. I know how drums work, but I can't get up there and play them.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. It's not going to work out. So yeah, I just program.
yeah. If you ask me to do a live performance, I'd have no clue what to do.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm just not a musician, really.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's something that I don't know. I think about it. It's not unique, but it is particular about Dungeon Synth that it's made for like computer reproduction.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know?
Dungeon Synth is quite specific in that regard because it's really just a a creative genre for people to explore on their own. It's really just go ahead and have some fun doing it. Just play around.
Yeah, and that's so fun. I love it.
Yeah, but that's essentially what it is.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
you
it's
don't.
like the fantasy worlds that inspire it. Like, it's just a big open scape in your audio workstation. You can do what you wish. It's great.
And you generally don't use like guitars, bass guitars, or actual drum sets. You don't even sing actually.
Right, yeah.
So it's just so doable with FL Studio and MIDI programming.
Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of running out of ammo here. I feel like we've hit every step of the way for the making music process. One thing that I do have written down, kind of low curiosity, doing a little internet sleuthing, it seems like Rog is horn in Croatian.
Yes.
Yeah, is there any significance to why you picked that name? Does it mean something to you?
Yes, of course. So, as you said, rog means horn, which can be interpreted as a horn of an animal or the musical instrument. You can take either of those. But the idea is that the horn of an animal is like a crown to its head. It's a noble symbol.
Oh my gosh, wow, that's so interesting. That's really nice.
Yeah, so it's like a symbol of power. It sits on the animal's head, and it's also a tool. So really, it's just this holistic symbol of strength and nobility.
Oh man, that really does tie into discography so well. It's really interesting and nice to hear that there is so much that ties back, so much thought behind that. Yeah, great. Well, honestly, that was incredible. I'm happy to end it here. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Well, I'd just like to thank you for inviting me. It was a surprise when I saw the email.
Oh man, absolutely.
I wasn't expecting something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know, music interview is so interesting to me, and it's something that, as a tiny community, there's not a lot of that going on, and there's a ton of benefits from hearing some background stuff like this. I was super happy to get a response from you.
Yeah, I wonder how much of what I've said is different from the ideas that people have of me.
Right. It's so, especially like the nature of dungeon synth, it's hard to know exactly where someone's coming from. I know that there's some stuff you said that surprised me, so I don't know, hopefully people feel the same. Alright, so I guess we'll head out here. Again, thank you so much for coming on. It's super awesome, really generous of you to spend your time, share that song. Yeah, alright, take care.
Yeah, you too.
Alright everyone, I think we just had an incredible talk with Rog. That was everything that I could hope for and more, honestly. It was super interesting, super informative. Be sure to check out all their work on their Bandcamp, which is rogofficial.bandcamp.com. Like we said, they've got like 12 albums and they're all great. They're all worth checking out, listening to a bunch. It sounds like there's a new one coming out as well sometime in the future. So yeah, I think that this was a wonderful start to the show. I've got some more really exciting guests coming up down the pipeline, so keep an eye out for what's to come. Alright, get out of here. Take care, everyone.